Welcome to today's episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. Today, we're diving into one of the most challenging, complex, and vital issues that we face in society: racism. Racism is something that has deep roots in our history, something that has shaped not just our past, but our present in ways we sometimes don't fully recognize. Now, I want us to go back right to the core and ask ourselves, what exactly is racism? How did it emerge? And how has it become so deeply woven into the fabric of our lives that sometimes we don't even see it? First, let's talk about the foundation of this issue. Racism isn't just an idea, and it's not something we're born with. It's a constructed belief system that grew out of historical circumstances. Centuries ago, we saw the start of systematic racism through things like slavery, where entire populations were subjugated, abused, and treated as property. This wasn't just a few decades or one isolated moment in history. We're talking about generations of people who lived, suffered, and died under systems that viewed them as less than human. When slavery was finally abolished, people might have thought that was the end of racial injustice. But the truth is, those same beliefs didn't disappear overnight. They continued to live on in the policies and institutions around us. Things like the Jim Crow laws kept segregation alive and cemented the idea that people of different races should be treated differently. This historical weight, this deep-seated discrimination, it's something that doesn't just evaporate with time. It sticks, it adapts, and today it exists in forms that are harder to see, but just as powerful. When we talk about racism in the modern world, it's not just about overt acts of hate or prejudice. It's about the subtle underlying beliefs and structures that have been built over generations. We call it systemic racism because it's embedded in the systems and structures that shape our daily lives: education, healthcare, the workplace, and of course the justice system. Think about it. Children growing up in underfunded schools, entire communities with limited access to healthcare, people being profiled and treated unfairly by law enforcement. These aren't isolated cases. They're patterns that emerge from a history that has long valued some lives more than others. Now, here's where it gets personal for all of us, because whether we realize it or not, we all carry certain beliefs or biases that come from this history. Sometimes we're not even aware of them. They're so deeply ingrained that we think of them as normal. This is what people mean when they talk about implicit bias. It's that small, sometimes unconscious preference we might have for people who look like us, who share our background or culture. It's not always a conscious choice, but it affects how we treat others and how we move through the world. This isn't about labeling people as good or bad. It's about recognizing that we're all part of a culture that has been shaped by these narratives, and that culture impacts how we see others and ourselves. So why should we care? Why is it important to dig into this history, to unpack these biases, and to confront this uncomfortable reality? Because if we don't, we risk repeating the same mistakes. We risk passing down the same pain and division to future generations. But more than that, we have a chance, an opportunity to make things right, to create a society that values every person equally, where people aren't limited or judged by the color of their skin. And that starts with understanding. It starts with acknowledging that our society has been shaped by racism in ways that go far beyond individual actions or intentions. Let's face it, having these conversations isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. It challenges us to look at parts of ourselves and our society that aren't pretty. But that's exactly why it's so important. Growth doesn't happen without discomfort. Change doesn't come without challenge. So as we dive into this topic today, I want us all to keep an open mind and an open heart. Remember that talking about these issues isn't about blame or guilt. It's about honesty. It's about understanding the weight of history so we can move forward together toward a better future. We owe it to ourselves and to the generations that come after us to take this journey, however hard it may be. Let's continue this journey, because if we really want to understand racism in today's world, we have to look at how it's transformed over time. Racism today isn't just what you'd see in a history book. It's not the same overt, brutal acts of discrimination we saw in the past. In fact, it often hides in plain sight, woven so subtly into our society that it's almost invisible. That's part of what makes it so challenging to address. Racism has evolved, shifting from blatant acts of hate to more insidious forms, things we might not even recognize as discrimination at first glance. It shows up in what we call implicit bias, in our assumptions, in the systems and institutions we interact with every day. So what does this look like in the real world? Well, it's everywhere, from the classroom to the courtroom, and even in the media we consume. Take education, for example. Kids growing up in neighborhoods with less funding are getting fewer resources, fewer opportunities, and a different quality of education. This isn't just some coincidence. These communities have often been disadvantaged for generations, and the cycle just keeps going. A kid born in a wealthier area gets access to better facilities, more extracurriculars, teachers with higher salaries, and overall a more supportive environment. Meanwhile, kids in lower income, often minority, heavy neighborhoods face an uphill battle from the start, fighting against a system that's stacked against them before they even set foot in a classroom. This isn't an accident. It's a direct outcome of policies and decisions made over decades, where systemic racism dictated who got what and who was left with the scraps. Then there's the healthcare system. Studies consistently show that people of color receive different medical treatment than white people, even when they have the same symptoms or conditions. Black Americans, for instance, are more likely to die from treatable illnesses simply because they don't get the same quality of care. We're talking about things like doctors taking a patient's pain less seriously, assuming they might be exaggerating or simply not having access to proper medical facilities in their community. When you think about it, this kind of discrimination is terrifying. It's life and death. And again, it's not usually an explicit choice that doctors or nurses are making. It's this deep, rooted, often unconscious bias that affects how people are treated. And then we have the criminal justice system, one of the most glaring examples of modern racism. Look at the statistics, and it's impossible to ignore. People of color are more likely to be stopped by the police, arrested, and receive harsher sentences than their white counterparts for the same crimes. Think about that. The same actions, the same situations, yet drastically different outcomes based solely on race. This isn't a matter of a few bad apples or isolated incidents. It's a system that consistently disadvantages certain groups while giving others the benefit of the doubt. When we say systemic racism, this is what we mean. It's baked into the system, and it's been that way for so long that some people don't even see it. It's just how things are. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be this way. We built these systems, and that means we can change them. And let's not forget the role of the media, which plays a huge part in shaping how we see each other. Think about the stories we see on the news, the way certain groups are portrayed compared to others. When a white person commits a crime, the media might talk about how they struggled with mental health or came from a tough background. But when a person of color commits a similar crime, the narrative often shifts to something more dangerous, more criminal. These kinds of portrayals seep into our minds, into our culture, and they shape our biases. They make us see people of color as more threatening, more criminal, and less deserving of empathy. Media isn't just reporting facts. It's shaping perspectives, and that has a real lasting impact on society. So here we are, living in a world where racism has taken on this new shape, one that's harder to point out and call out because It's not as blatant or visible as it used to be. It's in the structures we've built, the policies we follow, and the beliefs we hold. And what makes it even tougher is that many people don't think they're part of the problem. I'm not racist. They'll say, I don't hate anyone. And maybe they're right in a personal sense. But that doesn't change the fact that they're part of a society where racism is deeply embedded in the systems around them. This isn't about calling individuals out. It's about understanding that we're all part of a larger culture that has inherited these patterns of discrimination, and they're not going to disappear just because we wish them away. We have to face them head on. As uncomfortable as it is, we need to recognize that modern racism is just as harmful as the overt racism of the past, even if it's less visible. It's a quiet, almost invisible force that affects millions of lives every day. And if we want to change it, we have to start by seeing it for what it is. We have to be willing to look beneath the surface, to question the assumptions we've been taught, and to recognize the ways in which our society is still profoundly unequal. Only then can we begin to dismantle these structures and build a future where everyone truly has an equal shot, where everyone can feel safe, respected, and valued for who they are. This is our challenge, and it's not going to be easy. But if we're serious about creating a fair and just society, it's a challenge we have to accept. Now, we've spent some time understanding the history and the complex ways racism still lingers in our systems today. But let's get real about something crucial. What are we going to do about it? How do we actually make a difference? This is where it gets personal, because the truth is real change starts with each of us individually. It starts in those small everyday moments, how we treat each other, how we listen, how we learn. If we wanted to build a society that's truly equal, that's truly free of these prejudices, we've got to take a long, hard look at ourselves and be willing to put in the work. So let's talk about what we can do as individuals. I think the first step, and maybe the hardest one, is to get honest about our own biases. Nobody likes to think they're part of the problem, but the reality is we've all got these ingrained beliefs, these assumptions we might not even be aware of. They're built from our experiences, from what we've been taught, from the media we consume, and they shape how we see people, often without us realizing it. But here's the thing, once we become aware of those biases, we can start to challenge them. We can start to catch ourselves in those moments when we might make a snap judgment about someone based on their skin color, their accent, their clothes, or their background. That's not an easy process. It takes humility, self-reflection, and a willingness to change, but it's powerful. Imagine a world where more people took that step, where more people chose to open their minds and see beyond their own assumptions. That's how transformation begins. Next, let's talk about education. And I don't just mean sitting in a classroom. I mean actively seeking out voices and perspectives that are different from our own. We live in a time where information is right at our fingertips. There are books, podcasts, documentaries, endless resources that give us a window into experiences that we might not fully understand. We have access to stories from people who have lived through the very things we're trying to understand. Listening to these voices, learning from them, is one of the most impactful things we can do. It expands our empathy. It helps us understand that the world isn't just the way we see it. It's so much bigger, so much richer. When we start to understand someone else's story, we start to break down the walls that keep us divided. And then there's speaking up. This one is tough because it can feel uncomfortable, even risky. But when we see something that isn't right, when we hear a racist joke, when we notice someone being treated unfairly, when we encounter those subtle forms of discrimination, we have to have the courage to say something. I know it's easy to let things slide, especially when it's happening in a group or when it's a friend, a family member, or a colleague. But every time we stay silent, we're allowing that prejudice to keep going unchallenged. Standing up in those moments isn't about shaming anyone or getting into arguments. It's about showing that we won't tolerate discrimination, that we're committed to treating everyone with respect. It's about setting a new standard for what's acceptable and what's not. And over time, those small acts of courage, those small moments of standing up for what's right, they add up, they create a ripple effect that can change the culture around us. We also have to think about our communities. Change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when people come together. So much of what we're trying to fix is bigger than any one person, and that's where community comes in. We need to build spaces where people feel safe, where people feel seen, where people can come together to work towards something better. And that might mean getting involved with local organizations that are doing the hard work, whether that's providing resources in underfunded neighborhoods, supporting education initiatives, or advocating for policy changes. Or it might mean starting conversations within our own circles, with friends, with family at work. Imagine if every person listening to this right now took the initiative to spark one of those conversations, to bring this topic up and make it something people feel comfortable talking about. That's how change starts to spread. When we create environments that support understanding and connection, we lay the groundwork for real progress. But let's not ignore the bigger picture here, systemic change. Yes, we need individuals to change, but we also need to see that reflected in our policies, in our institutions. And that means holding our leaders accountable. It means voting for people who are committed to creating a fairer, more just society. It means paying attention to the laws and policies that affect marginalized communities and making our voices heard when those policies fall short. Voting is one of the most powerful tools we have as citizens, and it's our responsibility to use it wisely, to elect leaders who understand these issues and are willing to make the hard decisions to address them. But let's not kid ourselves. This isn't a quick fix. This isn't something that will change overnight or even in a year or two. It's going to take time, commitment, and a lot of effort from all of us. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when it feels like we're not making progress. But that's when we have to dig in, stay focused, and remember why we're doing this. We're doing this so that one day future generations won't have to face these same struggles. We're doing this because we believe in the possibility of a world where people are truly equal, where everyone has a fair shot, where diversity is celebrated, not feared. So here's my challenge to each of you listening. Take this personally. Don't just leave it as a conversation we had on a podcast. Let it change you. Let it inspire you to do something, no matter how small it might seem. Whether it's educating yourself, challenging your own biases, speaking up when you see something wrong, or getting involved in your community, do something. Because when we each take responsibility, when we each decide to be part of the solution, we can create a world that is more compassionate, more just, and more united. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it will be worth it. And I think deep down, we all know that's a future worth fighting for. As we move forward, we can't ignore the role of our larger systems, the government, the justice system, education, healthcare, and even the economy. These systems are powerful forces that shape the way we live, the opportunities we have, and the futures we can build. But the truth is, these systems weren't designed to serve everyone equally. Many of them were built during times when society was openly discriminatory, and even though we've made strides toward equality, the residue of those old biases lingers. So if we're serious about making change, we need to look at how we can reform these institutions to make them work for everyone. And this isn't about tearing down everything or starting from scratch. It's about examining the gaps, the flaws, and the parts of our systems that continue to disadvantage certain groups, and then doing the hard work to make them right. Let's start with the justice system. We know that people of color, especially Black and Hispanic communities, are disproportionately targeted and treated unfairly by law enforcement and the courts. This isn't just a matter of perception. The statistics back it up. People of color are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, and given harsher sentences compared to white individuals for similar offenses. And this reality has huge consequences. It means that families are separated, communities are destabilized, and people's lives are derailed. We have to ask ourselves, is this the kind of justice system we want? One where people's lives are shaped not by what they do, but by the color of their skin? Reforming the justice system means pushing for fairer policing practices, eliminating racial profiling, ensuring that sentencing is fair and not influenced by bias, and investing in rehabilitation and support rather than punishment alone. It means looking at how we can bring more transparency and accountability to the system, because without that, trust is broken and communities suffer. Then there's education. I think we can all agree that education is one of the most powerful tools we have for building a better future. But right now, the quality of education a child receives often depends on where they're born and the resources available in their community. Schools in wealthier, predominantly white neighborhoods often have better facilities, more experienced teachers, and access to technology and extracurriculars, while schools in lower income, often minority, heavy areas, are underfunded, understaffed, and overlooked. This kind of inequality creates a vicious cycle where children who need the most support end up with the least. And it's not just a matter of money. It's about giving every child, regardless of their background, a chance to succeed. We need to push for policies that equalize funding, that invest in schools and communities that have been historically marginalized, and that ensure every child has access to a quality education. Because when we invest in education, we're investing in people. We're giving kids the tools they need to break free from the cycles of poverty and disadvantage. Healthcare is another area where disparities are painfully obvious. It's a simple fact. People of color in this country experience worse health outcomes than their white counterparts. They're more likely to suffer from chronic diseases, have less access to preventive care, and face higher rates of maternal and infant mortality. Some of this is due to economic factors like lack of insurance or financial barriers to health care, but a lot of it also comes from systemic bias. Studies have shown that doctors are more likely to dismiss the concerns of patients of color, that they might underestimate their pain, or that they make assumptions based on race that lead to inadequate treatment. And again, this isn't about blaming individuals. It's about recognizing that the healthcare system as it stands isn't serving everyone equally. We need to advocate for reforms that address these disparities, that ensure fair and unbiased treatment for all patients, and that make healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone. Because in a country as advanced as ours, no one should be dying simply because of their race or socioeconomic status. And we can't overlook the economy. Economic inequality and racial inequality are deeply intertwined. People of color in America are more likely to live in poverty, face higher unemployment rates, and have less access to opportunities for advancement. This is a result of a long history of discriminatory policies. Things like redlining, job discrimination, and unequal access to loans and credit. We have to recognize that when certain groups are systematically denied opportunities, they're put at a disadvantage that can last for generations. If we want to build an economy that's fair, we have to address these issues. We need to look at policies that create more equitable access to jobs, to affordable housing, to business loans, and to the kinds of resources that allow people to build wealth. And this isn't just about benefiting certain communities. A stronger, more inclusive economy benefits everyone. When more people have the opportunity to succeed, our entire society becomes stronger, more resilient, and more innovative. The role of the government is crucial in all of this. It's our government's responsibility to serve and protect all citizens, to create policies that promote justice, equality, and opportunity. And we, as citizens, have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable. This means voting, yes, but it also means staying informed, staying engaged, and speaking out when we see injustices. Change at the systemic level doesn't happen without pressure, without people demanding better. It means supporting leaders who are committed to addressing these issues, who have the courage to tackle the deep-rooted inequalities in our society. It means pushing for legislation that promotes fairness and equity and that dismantles the policies that continue to hold certain groups back. We have to recognize that reform isn't about making excuses or trying to erase history. It's about building a better future. It's about creating a society where justice is truly blind, where every child, no matter where they're born, has access to a quality education, where healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and where the economy works for everyone, not just a privileged few. This isn't a dream. It's something we can work toward if we're willing to put in the effort. It's something we can achieve if we're committed to fighting for a fairer, more just society. And yes, it's a big task. But if enough of us are willing to step up, to speak out, and to demand better, then together we can make this vision a reality. This is the kind of world we should want to leave for the next generation. A world that values justice, equality, and opportunity for all. It's a world worth fighting for. As we reach the end of this conversation, I want to bring everything together because we've covered a lot, from understanding the roots of racism, recognizing how it's evolved, exploring what we can each do personally, and looking at the bigger picture of systemic change. But now, I want to talk about something that often gets overlooked in all of this: the power of empathy, understanding, and unity. These might sound like simple, almost cliche ideas, but they're at the heart of everything we've been talking about. If we're going to make any real lasting change, we have to remember that this fight against racism isn't just about laws or policies or even education. It's about people. It's about how we see each other, how we connect with each other, and how we value each other's humanity. And that begins with a sense of empathy, with willingness to understand experiences that are different from our own. Empathy isn't always easy. It's a skill that requires us to step outside of our own perspective, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to feel their struggles, and to see the world through their eyes. And in a country as diverse and complex as ours, empathy is essential. When we make the effort to understand each other, to listen without judgment, we break down the barriers that divide us. We stop seeing each other as stereotypes or labels, and we start seeing each other as individuals, as fellow human beings who want the same basic things in life: respect, dignity, opportunity, and a sense of belonging. Imagine if we all took a little more time to listen, to ask questions, to really try and understand the challenges that others face. This kind of connection is what drives real, meaningful change, because it reminds us that we're all in this together. We're not just fighting for equality in the abstract. We're fighting for each other, for our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, and even people we'll never meet. And this brings me to the idea of unity. We hear this word a lot, especially in times of crisis. But what does it really mean to be united? To me, unity doesn't mean we all have to think the same way or agree on every single issue. It means we come together around shared values, around the belief that every person deserves a fair shot, that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, and that discrimination has no place in our society. Unity doesn't erase our differences. It embraces them. It's about building a community where diversity is celebrated, where we see our differences as strengths rather than weaknesses. Unity doesn't mean we ignore the hard conversations or sweep the difficult issues under the rug. In fact, true unity requires us to face those issues head on, to have those tough conversations, and to do the work necessary to create a better world. It's easy to be united when things are simple, but it's in the hard times, in the moments of struggle and division, that unity really counts. But let's be honest, this path won't be easy. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when it feels like we're not making progress, when it seems like things might never change. In those moments, we have to hold on to hope. Hope is the fuel that keeps us moving forward, that keeps us striving for a better world, even when it feels out of reach. Hope isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. It's a decision to believe that change is possible, that our efforts matter, and that each of us has a role to play in building a more just equitable society.
Yeah.
And this hope isn't something we hold alone. It's something we share with each other. When we see others fighting for justice, for equality, for a world free of hate, it reminds us that we're not alone in this journey. It's a reminder that together we're stronger than any force that tries to divide us. So here's what I want to leave you with. Let's not just talk about change. Let's be the change. Let's carry these conversations into our everyday lives, into our communities, our workplaces, our schools, and our homes. Let's make empathy, understanding, and unity our guiding principles. Let's look at each other not as strangers, but as members of a shared community, as people who are all working toward a common goal. A future where everyone has an equal chance to thrive, where justice and fairness aren't just ideals, but realities. This is the legacy we have the power to create, the story we get to write for the generations to come. And it starts right now with each of us choosing to be part of the solution, choosing to stand up against hate, and choosing to build bridges instead of walls. We don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to have all the answers. We just have to start to keep going and to keep believing in each other and in the power of change. Together we can make this world a better place. Together we can turn the dream of equality and justice into something real, something lasting. So let's take this journey together, step by step, day by day, with the knowledge that we're capable of creating a world that truly lives up to its ideals. That's a world worth fighting for. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being willing to be part of this journey towards something greater. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to take a moment to really reflect on what this all means, not just for society as a whole, but for each of us individually. We've taken a deep dive into one of the most challenging issues of our time. Racism, inequality, the ways these forces shape our world. They're not easy things to talk about, but I believe that by having these conversations, by facing these difficult truths head, we're taking the first real steps toward creating meaningful change. And as I sit here talking to all of you, I'm struck by this profound sense of responsibility, a responsibility that we all share. Because if we don't confront these issues, if we don't make the choice to be part of the solution, then who will? And when, if not now? We live in a time of incredible opportunity. We have more tools than ever to educate ourselves, to connect with people who have lived vastly different lives, and to lift up voices that may have been silenced for too long. This isn't just about changing laws or policies, though those things are important. It's about changing minds and hearts. It's about creating a culture where kindness, fairness, and understanding are at the center of everything we do. Imagine what our world would look like if every one of us took that responsibility seriously. If each of us made it a priority to learn, to listen, and to grow. Imagine a society where people aren't judged by the color of their skin, their background, or where they came from, but by their character, by their dreams, by what they bring to the table. That's the kind of future we're fighting for. And it's within our reach if we're willing to put in the work to stay hopeful and to keep pushing forward even when it feels difficult. I know change like this doesn't come easy. It's not going to happen overnight, and there will be times when we feel frustrated, when it feels like progress is too slow. But here's the thing, real, lasting change takes time. It takes commitment, and it takes a willingness to keep going, even when the road gets tough. And I want all of us to remember that we're in this together. This journey isn't something any of us have to face alone. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every step we take toward understanding each other a little better, it all adds up. It's like drops in a bucket, and over time, those drops can fill an ocean. So as we close today, I want to challenge each of you to carry this conversation forward. Don't let it end here. Bring it into your lives, your relationships, your communities. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues. Share what you've learned and keep learning. And most importantly, don't let the enormity of the task discourage you. Remember that even the smallest actions, when multiplied by millions, can transform the world. This is a journey we all have a part in, and together we have the power to make a real difference. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for caring enough to be part of this. The future is in our hands, and I believe with all my heart that we're capable of creating a world that's fairer, kinder, and more just for everyone. Let's keep moving forward. Let's stay united, and let's make this world something we can all be proud of. Thank you. And let's keep pushing forward, one step at a time.